Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Good Grief, Life After Loss. Thank you for being here today. So I wanted to get this week's episode out before Mother's Day gets here on Sunday because I think a lot of people are quietly dreading it and nobody is really saying that out loud. And I'm not going to come in here and tell you how to feel about it. That is not the point of this episode. I just want to talk about it. And honestly, actually talk about it because the version of this conversation I keep seeing online feels a little too neat and tidy, a little too hey, it's okay to be sad. And I think the reality of what this day actually does to people is a lot more uncomfortable and a lot more specific than sadness. So that is what we are going to talk about today. Now, before I get into it, I want to be upfront about something, which is that, as probably all of my listeners know, I have not lost a mother. And when I first thought about doing a Mother's Day episode, I honestly hesitated because, I was like, who am I to speak to that if I don't have the firsthand experience? I don't know what it feels like to lose your mom and then have to exist in a world that spends an entire day or week celebrating mothers. And I wanted to acknowledge that reality with you all. But here is what I do know is that grief changes every single holiday, every special occasion, every life event, and it changes them in ways that are really hard to explain to people who haven't experienced loss. And Mother's Day is no exception for me either. I remember after losing my brother Sam, that Mother's Day suddenly got really complicated in a way that I was not expecting and I was not prepared for. When Sam and I were younger, we had our little tradition every Mother's Day where we'd wake up early, sneak into the kitchen, try to be quiet, which we were never good at, and we would make my mom her favorite coffee. I'd have written a poem the day before that was always a little cheesy, a little dramatic. Tried to rhyme a new word with mom every year and started to fail as I got older. And of course, we would get a gift and put both of our names on it. We'd carry the tray of coffee upstairs, fight over who got the honors of that. And my mom would act totally surprised, even though we did this every single year and she would hear us in the kitchen fighting over how many scoops of coffee is needed. But it felt like us, and it felt like a family doing a family thing. And the two of us, brother and sister, we were in on it together and we had our plan. And now I am the only one doing it. It's just me. And I genuinely don't know how to hold that feeling and realization sometimes. Because there's this question that I honestly don't think has a clean answer, which is, am I showing up as an only child now? Or am I showing up as one of two kids when only one is still here? Because my mom didn't stop being a mother to two kids just because one of them is gone. That is still true. Sam is still her son. Yet I am now the only one here. I am the only one who can call. I'm the only one who can send flowers, who can buy a gift, the only one physically present at any of it now. And that is just a painful, really sad thing to say. And now the reality is I'm across the country, which adds this whole other layer. It's not just emotional distance, it's literal distance from the version of this day I used to know. There was no waking up early now and going to the kitchen to make my mom coffee and bring her coffee and gifts in bed. With or without Sam, now I've moved away and that's not possible. And so there's this thing I feel every year that I don't really have a word for. It's not grief exactly. It's more like a weight of responsibility mixed in with confusion, mixed with love, mixed with this low-level guilt that I don't really know how to shake. And I think that's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. The way grief creates these new emotional roles and responsibilities that no one gave you a manual for and no one knows how to help you navigate. And I hold all of this knowing that honestly my version of the day being hard is genuinely one of the lighter possibilities of how this day could affect someone. Because there are people going into this weekend carrying something that I can't fully imagine or even pretend to understand. Let's start with the most obvious one, the one that probably comes to mind first when you think about grief and Mother's Day. losing your mom. And for those of my listeners who have lost their mom, I don't just want to say like that must be so hard and move on, because that's too fast and that doesn't acknowledge the pain. And I want to actually sit in what this day looks like when your mom is gone. Because here's what I imagine, and feel free to tell me if I'm off, but I'd imagine it's not just the sadness of missing her, it's the specific, almost surreal experience of watching the world celebrate something that you've lost, that you can't celebrate. And you're scrolling through Instagram and it's photos and brunch and mimosas and flowers and I have the best mom captions. And you're like what, posting a tribute, writing a caption, trying to honor someone in 200 characters, trying to figure out whether to post at all, stuck posting memories from years ago rather than the new ones you're creating today. And I feel like there's something really disorienting about grief on a day that has a whole aesthetic built around it. Like, the world has this very specific visual language for Mother's Day, and suddenly none of it includes you anymore. Or at least not in the way it used to. And even the people in your life who love you and who mean well, they might not know what to say to you on this day. They might avoid it or ignore it. They might say something awkward. Or they honestly might genuinely forget for a second that your mom is gone. And those can all sting in their own ways. And the absence on a day designed entirely around presence and being with the ones you love, like that is its own specific kind of pain that I know many of my listeners understand. And then there is a grief that I think is somehow even more invisible, and that is the grief of a mother who lost a child. Because here's the thing, this day is supposed to be for you. Society is celebrating you, and yet the day is also a direct reminder of who is not here to celebrate you. And whether it's your only child, whether it's the baby that made you a mother in the first place, whether it's the child you raised for years before losing them, whether it's one of multiple kids, which means you're holding gratitude and grief for different people at the same time, which sounds very complicated. And I find myself thinking about what it must feel like to get a Happy Mother's Day comment from someone who doesn't know you've lost a child, or to receive flowers and not know how to receive them, or to have people celebrate you in a way that feels incomplete because the count is off, because someone is not in the number. Or maybe nobody knows at all. Maybe you lost a baby early before people even knew you were pregnant, and this day comes and goes and nobody around you understands why you're quiet, why you're sad today. And that kind of invisible grief, I think, is honestly one of the loneliest places you can be in, and I truly feel for anyone who finds themselves in that situation this year. And relatedly, the people who desperately wanted to be mothers and aren't, for whatever reason, fertility struggles, pregnancy loss, circumstances that didn't work out, dreams that haven't happened, relationships that ended, timing that never came. Mother's Day was not designed with them in mind at all. And that's an unfortunate reality. Like, Mother's Day was designed for a very specific dream world scenario where everyone is alive and well and happy. And yet, here Mother's Day comes every year asking something of you emotionally that nobody has any right to ask. And I don't, unfortunately, have a lot to say here other than I see you. And I think this particular pain gets talked about least of all, and it shouldn't. And I'm sorry for that. And then there's the category that might be the hardest to explain to other people on a day like today, which is having a complicated relationship with a living mother. Because complicated can mean thousands of things. Maybe your mom was absent. Maybe she was there but not in the way you needed. Or maybe there's addiction or mental illness or just years of frustrating dynamics that aren't clean. Maybe you're estranged. Maybe you're not estranged, but you're not close either, and you exist in this fuzzy gray zone where Mother's Day feels like an obligation you don't quite know how to fulfill. And the world is going to spend this whole week telling you to appreciate your mom while she's still here. I feel like probably a lot of my podcast listeners would tell you the same thing. Call her, take her to brunch, buy her something nice, cherish these moments. But if your relationship isn't like that, if it's complicated or painful or absent, that messaging can almost feel cruel, like you're failing at something that other people make look easy and think should be easy. And you might love your mom, But love doesn't make complicated relationships any more simple. Honestly, sometimes it just makes them heavier. And then, lastly, there are the people carrying more than one of these dynamics at the same time. Maybe you lost your mom, but now you're trying to celebrate Mother's Day with your children. Maybe you have a complicated relationship with your mom who is now gone, which means you're grieving not just her, but also the relationship you always wanted and never got. Or maybe you lost a baby and are now forced to watch other people celebrate today while they are just seemingly unaware of the pain that you're in. And there's this compounding that happens with grief on milestone days where it's not one layer, it's multiple. And that can be genuinely so overwhelming in a way that's really hard to communicate to someone who just doesn't understand because they haven't lived your experience. And I want to talk about something that I find genuinely fascinating and also genuinely awful, which is why grief gets louder on days like this. And it's not just because the day is meaningful, it's because of contrast. That there's this version of this day that exists in your memory, the traditions, the rituals, the people who were there, and then there's the current version, and your brain is running both of those at the same time. And you're not just experiencing today, you're experiencing today against the backdrop of every version of this day that used to exist in your past. And the gap between those things, that is where grief lives. And then there's the thing I want to name about grief on holidays that I think is really true and not talked about enough, which is that it doesn't always show up as sadness. Sometimes it shows up as irritability, like you're just annoyed by everything and everyone, even if you don't understand why. Sometimes it shows up as numbness and you kind of just go flat and you get through the day, but you're not quite there. Sometimes it's avoidance. You don't want to make plans, you don't want to be around people, you just want the day to be over. And sometimes it shows up as guilt because maybe part of you is okay and you had a nice moment today and then felt guilty for having it. Or you're not okay and you feel guilty for not being okay enough to show up in the way you think you should. Grief is just not a single emotion. It's this whole ecosystem of feelings that kind of do whatever they want to do, and grief does not respect the calendar, unfortunately. And there's one more thing I want to say before I wrap this up, which is that I think a lot of people are going to be quietly hurting this weekend and nobody around them is going to know. And some of that is by choice. You don't owe anyone your grief. You don't have to perform it or explain it or justify it to anyone. But some of it is just the nature of this kind of pain. It doesn't always have a language. It doesn't always have a story someone else can follow or is aware of. It just is what it is, and it lives inside you, and the world, unfortunately, as we all know, keeps moving around you. And I just think that's worth naming, that the silence around this day for a lot of people is real, and it doesn't mean they're fine. It might just mean they don't know how to say it, how to express it, how to ask for help, or they don't have anyone to say it to. And honestly, I don't have a neat and tidy ending for this episode. I'm not going to wrap it up in a pretty bow. But I do hope that if you are someone who is dreading this weekend, even a little or a lot, that you know you are certainly not the only one, that somewhere on the other side of this podcast, there are a lot of people moving through Mother's Day with some version of what you're carrying. And that's it. That's the whole thing. I'm thinking of you all on Mother's Day this Sunday. I hope you take care of yourselves this week. Again, thank you for being here, and we will talk soon.